Hey everyone, Samba here. I've just recently released a new version of my Warhammer mod for Dominions 5. It's version 2.4, and I thought I would just walk through the changelog. People seem to find these videos kind of useful, just go through the changes and why I've made some of them. So let's start at the top and we'll go nation by nation for everything that's changed since version 2.3. The big thing, of course, being that I added a completely new nation, Norska, but I'll have a separate video probably doing an introduction to Norska. So let's just go through the changes. So first, some general changes. I used clean shape commands on things with secondary temporary shapes, things that are on mounts where the rider dies and the mount keeps fighting. I used a command to make it so they don't end up with afflictions, and I also changed their max ages so that their mount, but that carries on fighting after they've died, isn't like super old, doesn't have lots of old age penalties. That was just kind of an annoying thing, and I went through and fixed that in all the places where it was causing a problem. I've also generally reduced seduction values. The mod manual lied to me about what the baseline of seduction is, and so I've made them more in line with the things in the vanilla game, like Oreads and things like that, Dryads. So, but the seducers in the Warhammer mod should now be kind of around those levels. Some of them are slightly better, some of them are worse. So yeah, that was a more closely aligning with vanilla values. Then on to the nation-specific changes. So firstly, the Beastmen. So the Great Bray Shaman of Slaneesh got ambidexterity. He's got like a whip and a staff, I believe, and he didn't have ambidexterity, so he was terrible with both of them. Taurox and Kazrak, which are both of their heroes, had some gold upkeep previously, so I've removed that. Heroes shouldn't have any gold upkeep. And Kazrak now has one hand slot, and the other one is holding his Scourge Whip. Previously, he had two free hand slots and a unique bonus whip, which didn't make any sense. It was like he was whipping it using his tail or something, so fixed that. And then some tweaks. The Bestigor were increased in their gold cost from 15 to 16 because they were a little bit too tempting to just always recruit instead of Gors, and hopefully this will make the Gors a bit more attractive, just that their elite troops are a bit more expensive. And I tend to make elite troops cost more because I think in Dominions generally you're willing to pay quite a significant premium for the more elite troops because they just do better in general in expansion and things like that until right at the end of the game where troops don't matter so much. The Tuskgor Chariot had its hit points lowered from 25 to 20. These were a bit too scary. They were kind of a bit too tanky. And I think that they're not supposed to be like a massive feature of the nation. They're supposed to be something you can use a bit of, but they're not supposed to be the most terrifying thing that the Beastmen have. They're still pretty scary though, but they're a bit less tanky now. And then Centaur hit points were increased from 18 to 20. This was just to make Centaurs slightly more attractive and a bit tougher. They are supposed to be quite tough. And in Dominion, centaurs and centaur-like creatures in general have quite a lot of hit points and are quite tough, so it's kind of to align with that a bit more as well. So hopefully centaurs are now a sensible thing to recruit. So that's it for the Beastmen. As you can see, overall, not really many changes, minor tweaks. Bretonnia didn't get very much going on. So the Grail Damsel and the Grail Prophetess have both lost their 10% random. And this is actually part of a more general change where I'm kind of phasing out the 10% randoms on things. They appear in the base game, they appear in vanilla, but I personally find 10% randoms more annoying than anything. I think they add a level of kind of analysis paralysis and complexity and difficulty when you're trying to plan what spells to research and what your nation is going to be able to use. And then they can just be annoying because you might be going, okay, I've got a 1 in 16 chance of getting this particular thing, or I've got this 10% random, but I'm just never getting it, so I feel like I'm missing out. So I've just taken them away. I think I'm going to keep things simpler. Dominions is already complicated enough working out what your mages can do, so we're taking those off, and you'll see that for a few different nations. Next up is the Chaos Dwarfs. Slave Giants now have normal item slots. This only matters if you Gift of Reason them, but it also matters for like hit locations and things. So because they didn't have normal item slots before, their hit locations are a bit screwed up, so I've just fixed that. And that's also happened for the other people that have giants too. I made a new sprite for Gut Stabbers to make them look a bit different from Sneaky Gits, I believe. It's nothing that special, but it just makes them look a bit different, which is nice. And then forts now get one fewer crossbow per tier. They had just slightly too many crossbowmen appearing in them, but they still have tons, and your capital still gets 45 crossbows in its defense because it's such a high tier fort, so you're still good at defending forts. The other thing I've done for the Chaos Dwarves, and I would say that this is going to be a buff and something that people will probably be quite happy about hearing, is that the rate of the stone curse affecting your mages has decreased by about a third. So it's still an issue, but it shouldn't be so kind of such a grind of like annoyance of like having to throw mages away because they're getting stone cursed. It's just been like toned down a bit, and I'll keep reviewing that and listening to people's feedback, because if it's supposed to be like a fun, flavoursome mechanic that's a bit of a problem, like a bit of a drawback, it's not supposed to be this like really annoying thing that's kind of grinding your mages down all the time. So, Dark Elves, the Cult of Pleasure now cannot emerge in the first 6 turns, and tier 1 of the cult is slightly less likely to appear per turn. The problem here was that I think people don't really understand the Cult of Pleasure mechanics that well, and the first time people were playing Dark Elves, a lot of the time they were having the Cult of Pleasure emerge. They weren't preaching their Dominion up, or they didn't have a high enough Dominion to begin with, and so they were ending up with the Cult of Pleasure becoming too strong in their capital right at the start of the game, and then it would just keep blowing their temples up and they couldn't get rid of it, and it was frustrating for people. So I've kind of fixed that. I've also greatly decreased the chances of more than one upgrade or downgrade of the cult happening in the same province on the same turn, which should avoid the kind of annoyance of like, the Cult of Pleasure has grown stronger, also the Cult of Pleasure has grown weaker. Just happening over and over again in the same province. It was kind of just weird and producing some message spam. So I've changed the code around to cut down on that, and that should help. I've also increased the bonus to chance of tiers 1 and 2 of the Cult of Pleasure, so it's kind of starting levels emerging based on the presence of male and female cultists, particularly having both a male and a female cultist present at the same time. Also helps tier 3 emerge. So if you want the Cult of Pleasure to be in a certain fort, then you've got more control over it, it appears, because you have more influence over it from just having male and female cultists there. The Dwarfs had their wall defenders revised. You now get 4 crossbows and 4 arbalests per tier of fort rather than 8 crossbows. They've just got some variety in their wall defenders, and I think I made some slight changes to their wall defender numbers as well, just to make them make more sense, be more similar to vanilla numbers. Empire factions, just a couple of changes to Middenheim and one to the Demigryph. So Middenheim now starts with a giant castle. The only difference between that and a normal castle is that it has thicker walls. So they've got a really difficult to siege capital, which represents the city of Middenheim is incredibly difficult to siege. It's built up of a like carved into the side of a mountain, I believe. Also, their forts now get more archers built in, which is just to represent them being a bit better at defending their forts, and because archers aren't as good as crossbowmen, and that's what they use. So better wall defenders, basically, more of them. And then Demigryph Order Knights. I had some feedback on these. People didn't really like the Demigryphs that much. There's some more changes that I might change to them in the future, but for the moment, this should help a lot. Is that they now have a lance. People love lances, and the Demigryphs have lances, and they get +2 hit points, which should help them be a bit more survivable, given they've got the higher protection than normal knights as well. So hopefully Demigryph's a bit more interesting and a bit more of a feature now. Moving on to the Greenskins, quite a few changes here because I've been playing the Greenskins a lot recently. So Giants have normal item slots, we've already discussed. Black Orcs had their gold cost decreased from 17 to 16, more in line with the kind of elite troops. It was just a bit too much before, and they weren't that attractive. So they're a good resource dump, particularly now. The Stone Troll got +3 protection and snow move. Just better represent it and make it different from the newly added River Troll. So I've had added River Troll to the Savage Orcs. I'm not using that in my multiplayer game because that's not using version 2.4, but if you are keeping up to date with it, you'll be able to use River Trolls. Yeah, but Stone Troll having +2 prot is actually fairly significant because their prots are not that high, and the higher their protection goes up, the better their regeneration is. So Stone Troll should hopefully be a bit better now. Spider attack noises change to be less annoying because I don't like the noise of them going. So it's just less noisy and horrible. The amount of experience required for promotion of bosses, big bosses, war bosses, and heroes made uniform and generally increased as well because people were finding it a bit too easy to constantly get wars. And you can see that in my multiplayer game that I've been able to trigger maybe a little bit too many kind of promotions and wars and things during the course of that game, even though I haven't really been trying too hard towards it. Forest spiders and spider riders now get web attack, single use, so they're less useless. Basically, Spider Riders were just not very useful. They weren't as good as Wolf Riders, and they definitely weren't doing what I wanted them to do, which was be like a kind of a feature of having Forest Goblins. But yeah, now they have web attacks, although it's not as good as a normal web because it's also MR negates, so only works on certain troops really, but it's useful to have. Good against like basic knights and things, human knights. Trolls can now only use their vomit twice per battle. They were always supposed to have a limited amount of ammo for using their vomit. I just kind of hadn't coded it right. And yeah, that's good because previously that was becoming a big thing with them, was they just had these area effect vomit attacks they'd keep doing. So now they're a bit more limited. Black Crag now start with a castle rather than a fortress, which is just, making some difference between them and the Savage Orcs. Black Crag definitely have a better start than the Savage Orcs because of that superior starting fort that they have. Goblin Great Shamans had their random removed and their gold cross was increased slightly because they're a bit too good. Forest Goblin Great Shaman, this is a big change to the Savage Orc faction, Bone Nose Tribe. They lost their 10% random. They're now cap only. This is the most significant thing. And their gold cross was significantly increased. They were just too good before. And you can see in the multiplayer game I've been playing with them recently, I just built loads of them and they're just really good. Orc Great Shamans had their two 100% randoms consolidated into a single 100% random to just overall. I mean, the Orcs and Goblins aren't supposed to be amazing at magic, and they had these mages that were just a bit too good, a bit too many paths in total, basically. So I'm kind of trying to tone down how strong mages are where I can. Like I'm trying to be more careful about that. So there may be some more of that coming for other nations, but for now, this is one for the Greenskins, and another 10% random removed from the Night Goblin Great Shaman. So I've already mentioned I added the River Troll for Bone Nose Tribe as a swamp recruit and as a summon. So get a swamp and you can make lovely River Trolls, which are really cool. I've had a lot of fun with them in single player at least. And then I also added a new hero, Snagler Grobspit, who is a Forest Goblin War Boss hero who's on he's like a Spider Rider superhero. And he's got some Death Creeper Spider Riders, which are elite versions of Spider Riders, and they're unique to him. You only get Death Creeper Spider Riders with Snagler Grobspit. Moving on to the High Elves, the Unicorns of Avalon are now sacred. This was an often requested thing, so now you've got a summonable sacred troop, which is kind of cool. Swordmasters had their air shield increased from 20 to 30%, which makes them a bit more viable against crossbows and things because they're quite expensive, and hopefully they're just generally a bit more attractive now. The Dragon Mage on Sun Dragon, his hit point was increased from 20 to 22. I'm still hearing that it is not an attractive spell to cast to put the Dragon Mage on the Sun Dragon, so I'm going to look at that again, the cost of that in the future. But for now, he's got a bit more hit points. And White Lions are made slightly worse. Their cloak protection was reduced by 1, but they're still pretty good. I'm just going to see, these are just like minor tweaks to see if I can move people away from constantly using White Lions and not using other stuff that the Elves have. And then the Lothern Sea Guard gold cost was reduced from 22 to 20, so that should also hopefully be a bit more viable. So moving on to Khorne, I fixed a promotion event that claimed that it gave you Bloodlust and it didn't. Now it doesn't. It tells you what it actually does. The promotion events now almost all give you additional blood slaves. So when you're getting your commanders and things promoted, those events where they go like, oh, I'm an exalted hero now, or I'm a chaos lord now, you get some blood slaves as well. And this is because I'm trying to move Khorne. I'm going to try to have them be a blood power, have the ability to have a blood economy, but not really focused on hunting. Like they have bad hunters at the moment. They've got a negative douse bonus, and I want them to get their blood slaves through more of a kind of conquering style of doing things. So we've got that, and there's some other changes to do with that too. Specifically, the Red Harvest mechanic has an extra 10% chance per positive candle to give an additional 1d3 blood slaves if a fort is present. So if you have a fort in a province that you've conquered, and you've got positive dominion there, you've got a 10% chance per positive candle to give 1d3 blood slaves. So that's just more income if you've got a fort, because you like building forts, you're Khorne, you're militaristic in your territory, so it's more blood slave income overall. Number of fort defenders was reduced because it was a bit over the top. Chosen Knights got their natural protection increased, so their overall protection is a bit better now. People were finding that the Chosen Knights were not attractive enough, so I've just slightly improved them. Chaos Knights were, on the other hand, a bit too good for their cost, so I've bumped their cost up from 70 to 80 because they can get promoted into Chosen Knights as well. And the Chaos Warriors gold cost was increased from 28 to 30. Same reason, Chaos Warriors were a little bit too good, so I've just put their cost up slightly. And it's also just a rounded number, which is nice. And I made it so Scarbrand, which is one of their heroes, cannot appear until turn 20. It was turn 16, and if he appeared on turn 16, he could cause too many problems. He really is incredibly powerful, Scarbrand, so I have to back him off a bit. So moving on to the Lizardmen, Saurus Cavalry. So this is another one where people were a bit disappointed in Saurus Cavalry. I saw a couple of videos talking about that. Didn't think they were particularly good, and I kind of agree that they got a bit nerfed when I made them into a rider gets killed and then you get a second shape. They lost a lot of hit points in the process of doing that, so I've just increased their protection and the hit points slightly, but they are slightly more expensive as well. They were always intended to be somewhat heavy cavalry. They weren't intended to be like a light cavalry or a medium cavalry. I'm intending them to they're not quite as good as like a knight, but they're pretty heavy and scary, so they're a bit more like that now. Forts had their fort defenders changed a bit, but it's not super interesting. And then pretty much all demon summoning spells were removed from the nation. This is because I have the controversial thing that I have given the Lizardmen blood magic to represent Sotek, because they're very into doing blood sacrifices and things. It's kind of based on the Aztecs. but they are very, very, very anti-demons, and so I've removed all the demon summoning spells. You just can't cast them if you're the Lizardman. So your blood magic is not for that. It's for maybe doing imps and forging things. Moving on to Nagash's art, which is before Norska, the previous new nation on the block. I added ambidextrous to the Morghast and Harbinger. They should always have had it. It was just a typo. They didn't have it. And then I made some minor fixes to the number of solace you get from the zombie mobliner spells. This is not very important, but it's just making it consistent with the descriptions. Mummies had their natural protection increased slightly because people were a little bit underwhelmed with them. Hopefully this will help them be a bit more attractive. These are very minor tweaks, but this is how I like to do things, make minor tweaks in both directions until things reach a good point. Nagash, when you summon him, somebody mentioned they felt like it wasn't a big enough event when you summon Nagash. He's like this super important thing. Everyone in the world's terrified of him and so on. So I've made it so that if Nagash is alive, if he's been summoned up and hasn't been destroyed, then death is increased across the world just by him existing. So players can destroy him to end this effect. I added the Skeletal Warrior Legion and Skeleton Cavalry Regiment spells, so you can summon more Skeleton Warriors and more Skeleton Cavalry if you've got high enough death magic. You can make tons and tons and tons of them with that. I added a Recomposition spell, which is basically a low-level death spell to allow healing of things that can't otherwise be healed on the battlefield only. But that's a nice thing for your Revenants and things to do, and it lets you heal up like Soulless Giants, Corpse Giants, and your Sacreds as well. You can heal with that. And then I also added a battlefield spell called Dance Macabre, which is a hastening spell which only works on undead, which is a classic from the tabletop game that I wanted to represent in the mod. Nagrond got a new hero, Rakath the Beastlord. He is a cool kind of Beastmaster guy who's on a black dragon, which is pretty cool. And then I added Norska as a nation, so you can check Norska out. I'll have a separate video on those. And then we've got Ogre Kingdoms, Skaven and so on. I will get to those in a second. Just going to have a little drink before I do that. That's better. So we also have, for the Ogre Kingdoms, we've got a couple of fixes. So firstly, same as before, Slave Giants now have normal item slots. That's Giants. That's been changed for all the nations with Giants. Greasus Goldtooth, since he's mounted on Rhinox, now has the mounted tag. Just must have missed it off before. And then the Butcher has lost its 20% random, but I have reduced its gold cost from 110 to 100. So I think this is overall a little bit of a nerf, but honestly, people were using Slaughter Masters a lot anyway, so that 20% random on the Butchers wasn't so important. And they're a bit cheaper now, which is better for your blood economy, I think. For the Skaven, so we start off with, this is actually something that the Distant Horizon mentioned in his video some time ago. Squeal had, the rats that he summoned in battle didn't have the built-in morale bonus that he would give to his other rats. And so I've added that in now, that they have a built-in morale bonus. So basically, yeah, all of your rats, the ones you summon in battle and the ones you're leading outside of battle, they all have quite high morale for rats, because Squeal is supposed to do that. Added a second commander to Province Defense at 20 plus. I can't remember what it is, but yeah, you get a second commander now. Ikit Claw had his item slots fixed and had a head slot added. There are a few heroes that I've been fixing that on over time, and this is just one that I hadn't yet done. None of the heroes have 3 misc slots anymore, and that was a bit weird, and I decided to just stop doing it. It didn't really fit with Dominions that well, so basically very, very few heroes have 3 misc slots now. And none for the Skaven. The Warlocks lost their 13% random, but they got their gold cost reduced. Warlock Engineer, same thing. Plague Priest, same thing. Plague Chanter lost his 13% random, but then didn't get decreasing gold cost because they're already very cheap as researchers and kind of blood economy guys, so they just lost the random. And the Greyseer lost the random and had his gold cost reduced quite a bit, actually. So the Greyseer is maybe a bit more attractive now. The main thing with this is, again, it's just this 10% random thing. It's a shame I had to lose all these 13s, because obviously 13 is the special number for the Skaven. But I just don't want to have these 10% type randoms in the game anymore. Or at least in my mod. So for Slaneesh, the Chaos Troll was given ambidextrous. Didn't have it before, that was an omission, just an accident. So now he should be a little bit better at hitting things. He's got 2 nasty weapons he can whack stuff with. And he also vomits, I believe. The number of fort defenders was reduced quite significantly. There were way too many fort defenders basically for Slaneesh before, and now that's been reduced to a more sensible number. Chaos isn't that into defending forts. Chaos Knights were increased and Chaos Warriors were increased in terms of gold cost, same as with Khorne. Still very useful, both of them, I believe. And then the Chosen Knight gold cost was also increased in the case of Slaneesh because they were perhaps a little bit too good for the cost. So just kind of evening those out. It was getting a bit too close between them and the Chaos Knights as well, otherwise, so we have to push them up a little bit. For Tilea, the Beorg Bearstruck, the leader of Beorg Bearstruck's Bearmen of Urslo, was significantly buffed up because the Norskins have their own Bearstruck now. That's like a national thing for the Norskins, and the way I was making them, they were quite a bit better than Beorg Bearstruck, so I just made him fit in more with them by making him quite a bit better. So that's now a really cool regiment of renown to get us Tilea, because Beorg is such a badass. Tomb Kings, this is something that user Beard from the Ruby Discord pointed out, is that their scout, who was a skeleton boy, was not able to go underwater, and now he is a poor amphibian, so they do now have a scout capable of going underwater, so that's good for them. And then we've got the last of the changes here is a ton of changes to the vampires. Obviously, I had a lot of feedback recently from, had some feedback from Lucid, had some feedback from Distant Horizon, who was playing as the vampire count. I played as the vampire counts myself, and I actually got quite a bunch of feedback after I made my nation video for them, my introduction to the vampires or overview of the vampires. So quite a few changes. There's probably going to be more changes to the vampires. They're such a difficult one to balance and make changes to because they're such a complex nation. But hopefully these are going to make them more interesting and significantly less powerful. I think the vampires were just too good before, and they're supposed to be quite a strong power in the mod, but I didn't intend for them to be the best nation in the mod. That's for sure. So some minor fixes to the Sombra Solace you get from the zombie mob line of spells. So that's the same as with Nagash's are. Now this is the big one. Is basically vampires now cost 4 commander points for the normal vampires they make, and then for the Lord level vampires, the higher tier vampires, they are now 6. So you can see this has happened for basically all of the bloodlines. But Necrarchs went from being 2 to 4. Necrarch Ancients went from 4 to 6 commander points. The Necrarch's paths were changed. They lost their DSB random. The AFE random is now AFED. So toned down their magic a bit and changed their randoms a little bit. The Ancient's got his Blood 2 taken down to Blood 1. So again, I'm kind of nerfing the magic here because the Necrarchs were just too strong magically before. They had their research bonus reduced because even though they were expensive, they could just rush research ridiculously fast previously, which meant that people would take them early and then they'd just be able to rush really, really fast to spells like, Burden of Time or things like that, spells that were quite onerous. And same thing with the Necromancer Acolyte, his research bonus was decreased, just to decrease the overall horsepower when it comes to research. And of course, now that they're double the commander points for the basic Necrarch, you're not going to be making them as your main researchers. You still will want a bunch of them, though, I hope. I hope all of these vampires are still useful, even though they take a lot longer to make, and they'll be rarer now, basically. So Von Carstein vampires went from 2 to 4 CP, and Von Carstein Lords from 4 to 6. The Von Carstein vampire paths were changed. They lost their 10% random from both of those. So it's just the 10% randoms they lost there. Everything else is the same. The Larmian, same thing, commander point increases. They've got their consort has increased as well because the Larmian consort is kind of similar to a basic Von Carstein or to a Blood Drake. So yeah, you can do quite a bit with the Larmian consort actually. I think he's not bad and I quite enjoy using him. The Assassin had their gold cost increased because assassins in general are quite onerous in the game, and it's just to fit with my general philosophy about assassins being a bit of an onerous thing. Moving on to the Strigoi. True Strigoi and now went from 4 to 6. Strigoi went from 2 to 4 commander points, and Winged Strigoi from 2 to 4. The True Strigoi paths were changed. They lost one of their randoms, so the True Strigoi have a fairly significant thing, and they're losing that ENB because the N were particularly good for buffing. So the True Strigoi are a bit less over the top now. Blood Dragon CP has gone from 4 to 6, and Blood Drake from 2 to 4. It could be that the Blood Dragon and the Blood Drake, there is a bit of a problem here. They're not quite like the other vampires because they're not as good as mages, but they could just take a lot of stuff on their own. They're like really strong thugs. And so I hope that this will be okay, this balance point, but I will keep an eye on them. They got their research malice reduced, so it's less extreme. They can maybe do a bit of research now, and they got their gold costs reduced because, of course, this is hitting them a lot harder than it's hitting the others because they're not really like powerful mages. Then Master Necromancer's path of change just removed the 10% random from the Master Necromancer, and then the Cairn Wraith and Torture Spirit's Chilling Grasp, which was armor negating, which is just too good to have armor negating cold damage like that, is instead now armor piercing. So you can resist it a bit using armor, so it's a little bit less good on those. Particularly that was nasty on the Tortured Spirit because you can mass them a bit more than the Cairn Wraiths. The Cairn Wraiths hit points were decreased a bit for the troop and a bit for the commander because they were, if you could get some protection buffs on them in particular, they were just really nasty. Given that they don't really cost anything in terms of resources and recruitment points, it's just a gold thing. People were making them early on, they were just tanking through stuff a little bit too much. And then finally, we've got the recomposition spell added in, which is the same as the spell that you can use with Nagashazar, and the Dan's Macabre hastening spell only works on undead, same as Nagashazar. That is everything in version 2.4. Hopefully, it won't take me as long to come up with the next version. You know, the gap between version 2.3 and 2.4 was quite long. You know, we had holidays and things over it, and I was working on Norska, you know, for quite a long time. So I'm not, for my next version, I'm not going to be adding a whole nation or anything. I'll be adding kind of more heroes and making more balanced tweaks and things. So you should see a version 2.5 in the relatively near future. Anyway, that's it for everything on this patch update. And let me know if these are videos that you like to see. They're kind of dry and boring, to be honest. And of course, you can just read the patch notes yourself. But some people have said that they like them. So I'm going to keep making them as long as some people like them. But, you know, let me know in the comments and I will see you in the future. Bye for now.